Good afternoon to all, and welcome to this APA in Conversation with episode online talk. Welcome to all. My name is, as you can see, Igor Dizdarevic, and I work as a lecturer at APA, which stands for those who are not familiar with stands for the European Institute of Public Administration. It is an institute dedicated to essentially providing consultancy, research, training activities on the issues related to EU affairs, generally speaking. I myself specialize in EU law. We have our headquarters in Maastricht, but I'm addressing you from our antenna in Luxembourg. So again, welcome to all. Our subject is a difficult one today. It is about the Ukraine invasion by Russia and the EU's response to the latest dramatic events. The question is the following. It's been now, and that's actually a coincidence, that's been exactly a month since the invasion started on the 24th of February 2022. And that day was, in a way, also a day of geopolitical awakening of the EU. The question, of course, is how sustainable will this be? Will the Ukrainian war essentially reshape everything permanently? The question is, what are the tools at the disposal of the EU to react to the recent events and to address all the challenges, which are economic challenges, but mostly security challenges posed by Russia's actions in Ukraine. What tools are there to address the crisis? It's a very specific question because we found ourselves in the area of the Common Foreign and Security Policy, CFSP in abbreviation. And the Common Foreign and Security Policy is a very peculiar policy area of the EU because it is mostly intergovernmental, and the EU has, in essence, not exactly the same tools as it has, for instance, in the area of competition policy or in the area of common commercial policy. So thank you all for attending. I see that people are still connecting a bit. Now, how are we going to proceed? We have a number of panelists today whom I will be introducing in a moment. And we will be talking for something like about an hour together, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. The question and answers bit is going to be, I'm encouraging you to ask the questions in a dedicated chat space called question and answer. There's a normal chat as well to say hello or to comment. And we'll try as much as possible to address your questions at the end in the last half an hour. So that is for the methodology, and I'll be joined by three esteemed colleagues. So Petra Jene, who is the director of the European Institute of Public Administration of Luxembourg, and specializes in the area of freedom, security and justice with questions related to asylum, to migration. And we will be talking together about the question of migration precisely because this is one of the issues that has been raised with the flow of Ukrainian refugees into the neighboring and EU countries. Secondly, we will be also talking together with Wolfgang Keith about questions related specifically to the tools under the CFSP and the way decisions are made under the CFSP and how comes that the EU has the power to actually adopt sanctions, for instance. Wolfgang is a senior lecturer at APA and specializes in issues related to external affairs and external relations. And finally, we're going to look into the economic bits with my colleague Boris Naiman, who works as an associate professor and researcher at the University of Paris-Est Créteil, and who is not only specialized in economics, but also is very knowledgeable about the region, has himself worked and lived in Kiev. So that's our panel for today. So let's start with the question of the foreign policy angle and the common foreign security policy. I would just like to kick off, let's say, with the fact that what we have been witnessing in the past 30 days is quite remarkable because of the unprecedented myriad of sanctions that the EU has adopted against Russia and also against Belarus. So those sanctions started off with the annexation of Crimea, so already in March 2014. But what we have witnessed since the invasion, on the next day following the invasion, a first package of measures was adopted to respond to the recognition of the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, with sanctions against 351 members of the Russian State Duma, who voted in favor of the recognition. We had restrictions on economic relations and restrictions on the ability of the Russian state and government to access the EU's capital and financial markets. A few days later, we had a second package of sanctions already on the 25th of February 2022, targeting the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and its foreign affairs minister, Sergei Lavrov, in response precisely to the military aggression carried out by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. In addition, the EU imposed restrictive measures on the members of the National Security Council of the Russian Federation. The Council also agreed on a further package of individual and economic restrictive measures. And these sanctions are very wide because they cover the financial sector, they cover the energy sector, transport, technology sectors, and the visa policy. There was a third package of sanctions where the EU imposed an airspace ban on any aircraft operated by Russian air carriers, and what is really unprecedented and very peculiar is that restrictive measures are also targeting all transactions with the Russian central bank, which I think is a novelty to target central banks. It also, as you know, imposed some restrictions on broadcasting activities of Sputnik and Russia Today, introduced a SWIFT ban for 7 Russian banks, and also imposed sanctions on Belarus. There was a fourth package of sanctions on the 15th of March, prohibiting all transactions with certain state-owned enterprises, the provision of credit rating services to any Russian person or entity. And I could go on because the list is very, very, very long. But the main point is that this is an unprecedented set of restrictions, and it raises several questions that we're going to be looking at throughout this talk. In particular, the question of, well, does this mean that there is a new era, new period of EU integration that is being opened in the area of common foreign and security policy, as well as by extension in the area of the common security and defense policy, CSDP, yet another acronym. So that's one question. The second question, which we'll be asking a bit later, is, of course, what are the effects of the EU sanctions, both short-term and long-term? Are they going to be efficient? What can we expect in the future? And finally, we'll be looking a bit into the question of the EU's competence and actions in the area of migration when it comes to accommodating the flow of Ukrainian refugees. So let's start with the foreign policy angle with you, Wolfgang. So essentially my question to you is, what are the powers of the EU under the CFSP? How do you explain, how come that we have such a strong set of restrictions, and can we expect a new era for the CFSP?
Thank you, Igor. Yes, you said it very well. I mean, the EU has adopted an unprecedented set of sanctions within a number of days after the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And that I found it really heartening to see how quickly the EU was able to react to it. And this was in particular heartening if you followed a bit the history of EU sanctions towards third countries over the last years, because that was very often a quite frustrating thing. I think we all remember in 2020 when it took the EU weeks to agree on sanctions on Belarus after the Lukashenko crashed down on the demonstrations. Now that was politically uncontroversial. That came at basically a very low price, if any price at all, for the EU. And still, it took us weeks to agree on this because one country that represented 0.2% of the EU population blocked it for reasons that were completely completely not related to Belarus. So at that time, many of us came to the conclusion, okay, this EU system of sanctions is not working. This is unpractical, and we have to get rid of this unanimity requirement. So, and now we have seen with the Russian aggression, suddenly we managed to get it done within a number of days, a matter of days, and we managed to cut off Russia from the financial markets. In close consultation with the US and with the UK, we managed to block Russia from the import of advanced technology, which doesn't show its effect immediately. It will show its effect in the medium and in the long term, but it will have unprecedented effects, and it will have a huge impact in Russia. So for me, as a big Europhile, a fan of the European Union, that was really heartening to see. That gave me back a little bit of my hope and optimism in that the EU is able to get its act together in a crisis. But if we look back in the history of the CFSP, everything that happened in the field of the common foreign and security policy came as the result of a major crisis. You remember back in 1991 when the heads of state and of government agreed on setting up a common foreign and security policy. That was a matter of days after we could watch live on our TV screens the shelling of the old town of Dubrovnik in Croatia through the Serbian army. So that had an immediate impact. Now, the setting up of the common security and defense policy in 1999, that was just a few days after the end of the Kosovo War, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you see, particularly a rule, there has to be something, there has to be a major catastrophe to happen so that the EU gets its act together to act in the field of foreign and security policy. So I think this gives me some hope that there will be further developments to come.
Yeah, well, it's a very good point that you remind us also of the history of this, and as our audience can judge by my name, actually, I'm actually from former Yugoslavia and actually lived through the shelling of Sarajevo, so I remember it well. When it comes to what you're saying is quite interesting, because you're pointing out how good we are to react in times of major disasters and crises, but there is still this one problem which you illustrated with the example of Cyprus blocking sanctions against Belarus for totally unrelated reasons about their relationship with Turkey, essentially. But isn't this a problem that we still need essentially a unanimous voting in the Council? And can this be changed? Can we move somehow to qualified majority? How does that work?
Now, obviously, that is a big problem, because I mean, it's not normal that in order for us to function, we first need a major crisis. We should also be able to function normally if there is not a major geopolitical catastrophe happening. So getting rid of this unanimity requirement in CFSP is something that has been on the agenda for quite some time. The European Parliament has lobbied for it for quite some time. Also, already the former president of the European Commission, Mr. Juncker, has suggested to do this. Also, the present president of the European Commission, Madame von der Leyen, she is in favor of it. And I would say technically it would be relatively easy because we would not even need a treaty change for it. There is in the TEU a so-called passerelle clause, Article 31.3, that would allow us to go from unanimity to qualified majority without changing the treaty. However, the problem is here that in order to do this, first of all, we need a unanimous vote by the European Council, the highest political level, for this to happen. So in a way, it's we're back to square one. First, we have to agree by unanimity to not apply unanimity in the future. But I would also see that now there are that I see some tectonic shifts going on in things, that now suddenly things are possible that no one thought were possible before. I think there are some reasonable chance that we'll be coming to that point.
Right. The beauty of it is, as you say, in order to move from unanimity to qualified majority, you need a unanimous vote. But it seems that there might be a unanimity in this particular case, as if Russia somehow united the 27 together. I would actually also add, I mean, you are from Germany, and the things are happening at the level of member states which we never expected to, such as Germany announcing a special fund of 100 billion euros in the area of defense. And when we know the relationship between Germany and anything that's remotely military, that's quite a remarkable U-turn. In addition, we have countries which, for instance, are typically the champions of the so-called opt-outs from certain policies, such as Denmark, for instance. Denmark is now holding a referendum to join the European defense policy, which is quite remarkable. Finland apparently is now in favor of NATO accession. I mean, so even at the level of individual member states, things seem to get going. And then you mentioned also the question of the coordination between the EU and the US, in particular in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, how are external third countries involved in this, especially the UK, because they Brexited, so to speak? How does that work, this coordination?
No, there is a close political coordination between the US, between the EU, the US, and the UK. And here, I would also say it is Russia that has brought us together again. If you remember still that 6 weeks ago, we were squabbling with the UK about fishery and other tiny little things. And and here we discovered, hey, now we have some reasons for working together because we are absolutely on the same side. And we have finally more things in common than things that are separating us. Also, the transatlantic alliance is back into business. NATO is fully back into business. NATO, which before 2014 had a bit of an identity crisis because, where the defense organization in charge of territorial defense. So without an obvious enemy, many people were asking what they are good for. So all of these actors are back into business. And yes, there is cooperation at the political level. For example, there is the possibility that defense ministers or ministers from the US, UK, can join in the Foreign Affairs Council and be present there without voting, of course. But they're in the council working parties. At all levels, there is close cooperation, and it's not no coincidence that there have been parallel sanctions being taken by the EU, UK, US. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of change of information, of assessment to make sure that we are pulling on the same string. We are getting our ducks in a row. And Igor, you said it also, a lot of taboos have been broken on the level of member states. Now, absolutely. I mean, if I watch the political scene in my home country, in Germany, this is tremendous. I mean, but that Finland and also Sweden are now considering joining NATO. But this is also the precondition for things to move at the level of the European Union, because it is still the member states that are in the driving seat of CFSP. So in order for things to change at the level of the European Union, things have to change at the level of the member states. So this is quite normal. This is closely connected. So from this point of view, I'm rather optimistic that we will be able to continue speaking with a common voice. Now, what will happen then in the medium and in the long term when all the situation persists and wears off a little bit? Then this is something we're going to have to see. But for the time being, we're still very close together.
Right. Yeah, that's the international coordination has been quite remarkable so far. And I would add actually to that one thing that I didn't mention in the introduction is that there's now these sanctions from the EU, from the US in parallel, from the UK, but also you have a litany of European and American companies pulling out on their own from Russia, including, which I find fascinating, the gas and oil companies like BP, Shell, are pulling out of Russia on their own motion. So it is quite remarkable. Can I ask you, still in the context of the CFSP, there is this European Peace Facility, which is an initiative which predates the war. It was operational since July, I think, 2021. And now we have the announcement under this facility that the EU will provide an additional 500 million euros to equip Ukraine with arms, including lethal weapons, which is, by the way, financing weapons for the defense of Ukraine is unprecedented. That's precisely what hasn't been done in the war in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia and Herzegovina in particular. So how does this work? Has there been any formal decision about the 500 million, or where are we with that?
It's not only 500 billion, it's now in a total of 900 billion, because there has been a second package. And I just checked it, it has been yesterday in the official, I think it was yesterday, yes, in the official journal published. So we're going to have 900 million from well, it's not EU funds properly, because this European Peace Facility is outside of the EU budget. So that means it doesn't have to go through be endorsed by the European Parliament, which might probably make things easier. But it is, yes, it is the first time that the EU finances lethal weapons for at this level, and that shows you also how much the EU, the character of the EU as an international actor, has changed. I mean, keep in mind that the EU was set up as a peace project, right? You remember that in 2012 we received the Nobel Prize for Peace, but then the world was a different one, and the world is changing, and now we understand all that yes, if you want to promote peace at some time, you also have to be able to defend yourself or help others to defend themselves. So yes, this again, this is another taboo that has been broken, one of many. Another taboo that has been broken, and I might finish with this, is that also the EU is now considering Ukraine as a potential candidate for EU accession. something it always, for the last 20 years, it has strictly refused to do so. I mean, Ukraine has for 20 years, with some interruptions, insisted to get an accession perspective to the European Union. And the EU has always blocked it. The message was always, yeah, getting closer to the EU, yes, fine, association agreement, fine. But even thinking about potential candidate status, no, 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 no. It was always no. And now also, within a few days after the Russian invasion, the Council has asked the Commission to make a report about the prospect of a EU accession for Ukraine. So this is a first formalized step in the long and very long process that leads to eventually towards EU membership. And that was quite symbolic, even if we know that it might still take 20 years, because some countries have been on a holding pattern for more than 2 decades. Right, so that doesn't mean that it's going to happen tomorrow. And all this talks about an accelerated accession. Now, forget about this. This is technically and politically not possible. But the very fact that there is now a first formalized step in this process, something that the EU has always systematically ruled out before, that's another taboo that has come down.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable, I think, and one should well, let's remind our audience that not only did the EU always refuse to engage in this accession procedure, etc., but also member states were opposed. We all remember that the Netherlands voted even against an association agreement, which was just simply a partnership between the EU and the Ukraine. And I think you're right in reminding that actually Article 49, which is the accession article in the treaty, is a lengthy technical, legal, and political procedure. So I also agree that I don't see it realistic that in any short-term period of time, Ukraine would become a member state. And as you say, indeed, what would be the reaction, I don't know, of Montenegro, who's been candidate for ages, and then Ukraine all of a sudden would become a member. So I think that's not really feasible, but at least, as you say, a taboo has been lifted, and essentially now also the EU is dropping the idea that the Minsk agreements, that we cannot, that we wouldn't somehow expand further into and closer to Russia. That has been lifted as well. Okay, so let me turn perhaps now to the questions which are specifically more related to the economic aspects and to the sanctions. So I would like to ask you, Boris, what do you think of the response of the EU with regards to the sanctions? I mean, what is the short-term effect? What is the long-term effect? Can we even actually anticipate the effect? Can we estimate the effect of the sanctions on Russia?
So thank you, Igor, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think it's not easy. You know, we economists, when we want to focus something, we take the history and we look at past events, and then we forecast as we can, just a little bit better than weather forecast, not so better. So it's difficult to forecast events that are, by definition, totally new, as you said before, especially the financial aspects that are very uncommon and new. So it's quite difficult. However, we have some forecasts coming on at the moment, and we have. I want to give you some of the first forecasts that have been just done through the CEPR and people in London, and also working on these issues in Paris and CEPI. So we are looking at probably something about 20% recession for the second quarter in Russia. So a huge shock. And you have to be careful because these forecasts are already 7 days old. So as you said, Igor, things are moving very quickly due to particularly the fact that private companies are getting out of the Russian market at the moment. And that is not easy to forecast in addition, because this is, let's say, unlinear, as we said. So you have large company getting out of the market, and so that's have an effect. Another forecast that I found recently is that for the whole year, the fall of the GDP will be between 8 and 10% in Russia. So this is really also the first time that the GDP will fall so much in Russia since 1991. So we are talking about huge numbers. And again, this is forecasts that are not taking into account a lot of, let's say, change in a new sanction that could be taken now. And especially we are talking about different kind of sanction. Maybe we can go into detail with you in a moment if you'd like to be more technical. I want to say that the first important sanctions that you see is actually the central bank freezing basically all the assets of the Russian central bank. So the international central banks act very quickly. And I don't think that the Kremlin and Putin was expecting that at all. First of all, because he was hiding from his own administration his choice to start the invasion on February 24. So he didn't talk with economists neither, and he has an advisory group, economic advisory group, and he didn't talk about the consequences. But so they were not prepared that the assets of the Russian central bank will be frozen. So we can talk about a stock. Here we have a stock. Now we still have a flow. In a certain way, I will be a little bit tough and maybe a little bit pessimistic on the short term with, concerning what Wolfgang said. We are still financing the Russian war through the fact that we buy oil and gas. And that is the flow of money that allow Russia to continue the war. I will be either also tough on that for Europe and Russia is the more the war is prolonged, the more the cost will be higher, both, first of all, for Russia and asymmetrically concerning, because Russia is a relatively small economy compared to a European Union. So if you want to make it short, the GDP of Russia is 1/10 of the GDP of the European Union, roughly, even less. So they are 10 times more affected by any kind of sanction than we are. But if the war is prolonged, the effect will be durable for our economies and also for Russia, of course. So if we want to preserve employment, reduce poverty in European Union, I think we should do the sanction now as much tougher. So to stop the war as much as possible, stop the financing of the war. That's important if you want in economic terms. Yeah, you have a question.
Yeah, there's a bigger difference, I think, between the US now and the EU, because the US has effectively banned import of gas from Russia, whereas the EU is still fighting to, well, struggling actually to do so. So it seems that indeed we're still paying for Russian gas. That's the big paradox. And I think, I mean, it has triggered another issue, which is, of course, the strategic autonomy of the EU in matters related to energy. And there's been some new announcements, even yesterday, etc., about new plans. Because what has changed fundamentally in the energy sector for the EU is that we had an objective to be carbon neutral and energy self-sufficient by 2050. And now the deadline has moved from essentially 2050 to next Monday, in a nutshell, because now we have to do it like right now. And so there are already plans to reduce the volume of gas that we are importing by increasing energy efficiency and energy renewables at EU level, financing those activities, so that we would reduce already by 25% our consumption of Russian gas. But it's not like the US who just cut the pipeline. That's quite a big difference. If I understand your point correctly, is that what's costing actually currently Russia is not only the sanctions, but the war itself.
Yeah, I want to go on that further. actually, and it was the same, we talked about former Yugoslavia a moment ago, usually the war itself, the cost of the war is much more harmful for an economy than any sanction on the short term. So why? Because first of all, you have to use a lot of resources to finance the war. Second, because you create inflation, because usually you finance the war by monetary emission, and that was Russia starting in. And also simply because you also have destructions and you're losing competences, and you have a lot of people in Russia leaving Russia. The most competent people are leaving. The most dynamic people are now, leaving massively. I was just before the war started in Georgia, and already in February, you can see in Tbilisi a lot of people coming from Russia, just moving in advance. And so this effect is huge on the economy and has nothing to do with the sanction. The direct effect of the war is, at the moment, I will say 80% of the cost for Russia is coming from the war directly. So now why? Because simply Russia has also to increase the interest rate. They moved the interest rate to 20%, 20%. So there's no way at the moment for any person in Russia to finance any activity. So you have no money, and the cost of investing is too big. You have no possibility to produce also, because a lot of the Western components are not available. So you can't produce anymore any goods because the components are not coming anymore. And finally, you cannot sell or export because, of course, at the moment, it's difficult just to move the things and move out of the country. And so you have, I would say, 4 shocks in the same time. People moving out of the country, as I said before, Armenia, Georgia, every place they can, they move out. Second, you have no financing, no exports, no sell, no production. So basically, the economy of Russia is stopped. I mean, as never seen before. And the only thing that is I would say working is the export of oil and gas at the moment. There was a specialization that Russia has before. If you have the time to look a little bit at the structure of export of Russia toward the European Union, you will see that more than 60–70% of the export are essentially oil and gas. So that is catastrophic for the economy even before the war, but now it's really showing that Russia is moving toward a Venezuelan economy very quickly. So if I can summarize, is that and here you can listen to different podcasts and look at the analysis of Sergei Gureyev, who was the head of the High School of Economics, or others. Everybody expects Russia to be able to finance the war only few weeks. We're talking about only few weeks. Independently of what will be the European policy, the capacity to finance the war is just stopped at the moment. And the capacity to continue the war rely only on this flow of money coming from essentially the European Union on gas and oil. So I'll say that, of course, we can talk about the cost for the European Union because maybe some of the people would be interested to know more about what is the reverse cost for us of moving quickly and cutting the gas and oil. We have alternatives, but first of all, we have huge reserves. So we can stand up with the reserve we have in gas about 1.5 months and 2 months without even importing others. So it's possible for the moment to block the financing or progressively block even the export and rely on our reserves. That's one. Second, we can we observe that a lot of international companies are even not buying any more Russian oil. So why don't we move? Even the private company are moving this way. So we should think about the signal that European countries are giving. And I think also on the oil market, you can substitute quite even better than the gas because you don't have this infrastructure like Nord Stream 1 that is still functioning. The other aspect are very small in terms of effect. So we are not suffering from actually any kind of big export from Russia apart from the oil and gas. And this is essentially concentrated, especially to asymmetrically for some countries. So the recommendation that is made by economists a week ago, sending a tribune to a paper on Le Monde, is to help the households that are the poorest in the European Union, in case the prices are rising, as it is the case. So build up a system of supporting the poorest households in order that the social effect is not tougher for the population that is the poorest in the European Union. But I think, as you said, Igor, we were planning to move out of fossil fuel energies. We know since about 20 years we have to do this move. We delay this move, and we didn't want to plan it in a, let's say, I would say as an economist, more organized and systematic way. Now we have to move it more quickly. I don't think that this is the tougher consequences of the war. The tougher consequences for us is actually the fact that there's a risk of destruction of Ukraine, that we will have to assume the consequences. There is a risk of expansion of the conflict in other countries. So if we can prevent the financing of war, we can also probably prevent the extension of war to Moldavia, to there's talks about risk in Bosnia, but also in Georgia. So this is much more costly. In terms of economics, I would just say that the war by itself, it's much more costly than any kind of sanction. So if we can avoid the length and the duration of war, this is the best thing we can do. So I have a paper about that, and working on a large number of countries in transition. And because unfortunately, since the 90s, the beginning of the 90s, there was about 25 conflicts in the region. So we have some experts. What we see is that when natural resources, natural rent resources are small, the duration of conflict is smaller. And this is with checking in econometrics with a lot of variables. So I can tell you that if you reduce the natural resources rents, you reduce the duration of conflict. And this is statistically tested for several conflicts, like 25 conflicts. Okay.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, from the point of view of the EU, the cost, the biggest issue is, of course, the energy autonomy of the EU, cutting this big effort that has to be sped up in time now. We can't wait 2050. I know also from what you were saying that that essentially the Commission has announced that any day now there will be a legislative proposal requiring underground gas storage across the EU to be filled up to at least 90%, I think, by 1st of October each year. And I understand also from what you're saying that essentially we are not trade dependent from Russia. It's more the other way around, that they are much more dependent on trade with the EU. And now the other point coming from the Russian perspective, like the picture the figures you're giving about the drop in the GDP, about the fact that production has ceased. I mean, can that have political consequences within Russia?
It's difficult to link economic, I would say, shocks with political changes. In the same paper, we tried to have an estimate of political changes in case of wars or in case of crisis, and it's not so easy for different reasons. But I'll say that in order to have political changes and to have more chance to have political change, the first thing you need is counterpower. And in Russia, unfortunately, you don't have a lot of political counterpower. So you don't have free press. I mean, Russia is ranked by Reporters Sans Frontières, 150 country among 160. You don't have, unfortunately, judicial system that allow citizens to complain about, bad policies or even repression by the state or whatever. And so it's difficult to have political change in this context, and you don't have opposition. So you don't have a political alternative as a party structured as you have in most of our countries. You don't have such an opposition saying that tomorrow Russian could say, well, I'd rather have this one, this party or this one. So that's why also you have to be careful about any kind of opinion surveys that you have in Russia, because an opinion survey that we use also in economics sometimes requires to have freedom of choice and also realistic alternatives. So it's not worth doing in Russia an opinion survey, do you want or not Putin, if you don't have something else to propose. So opinion survey suggests you are not constrained in your choice. Huh? And here, I doubt anyone can say in Russia, yes, I know most of the Russian are didn't aware even of the situation of Navalny jail, or some of them don't know even about Navalny. You know, it's a limited number of people that are aware. So there's no opposition as such. So to answer to your question, I would say that even though today most of the oligarchs are certainly against Putin or not in favor of the invasion, they have no leverage on him because Putin himself has enough financial, I would say, capacities or strength. If he wants, he could use that part of this money, if he's still available at Kachin, to help himself during war. But other people around him, like the oligarch, are not able to move his decision or even to change anything. Now, the repressive apparatus, everybody was talking about that, and the FSB and militaries and so on. I doubt that they realize till today how much the invasion is not successful. So they have no clear information for different reasons about the failures of the campaign in Ukraine. So that's why probably it will take time for them to realize how much this is absolutely, even in the perspective of Putin making the war to reinforce his power, is something that is doubtful. So finally, I would say that if most of the people that were complaining about the regime are moving out of the country, the risk for Putin of being challenged by this population that is aware, that could access VPN, listen to other news using this VPN system is very limited at the moment. So unfortunately, there is no big, I mean, of course, I'm not in the Kremlin, I don't know, but there's no big chances that political change will occur by itself now. It's difficult. Economic consequences, as I said, maybe are taking time. So the population in Russia will unfortunately certainly suffer, but maybe in the 6 months, maybe 1 year, there would be really when people have no more savings or things like that. So it's difficult to forecast the reaction of the population. But what I can say to your question is that if you look at we have this situation in Serbia of how long Milosevic was able to stay on power and to remain after the sanctions and after all the difficulties with huge hyperinflation, financing of war, fall of more than 60% of the GDP in Serbia in the first year of war. Unfortunately, these kind of regimes find ways to maintain their power through the repressive structures, and I think it's difficult to challenge them. The only momentum when the regime started to be really challenged in Serbia was unfortunately after 1999, the intervention of NATO. So you see how much this kind of regime could resist to huge economic shocks. So my personal answer to your question is that of course, Russia would not suffer any kind of NATO intervention, we know, so that's clear. And I think, unfortunately, the main reason why the regime could fall is mainly from its own mistakes in terms of management. Here, I will just take a few seconds to give you one possibility. that is the example of Yanukovych, if you don't mind. So I didn't say in the beginning of my speech, but I stayed 3 years as an economic advisor to the government, so I know a little bit the functioning inside the government in Ukraine. So Yanukovych fall, and it's an investigation from the New York Times for those who read it. It's really interesting for very simple reasons. So there was a visit of the European Union after he used forces and killed hundreds of people in the streets in late February 2014. And after this visit, he signed a paper saying basically he will organize free elections because the one before was really contested by the OSCE and everybody. And also he will judge the people responsible for the killings in the street of Kiev. Okay. After that, he gets in the palace in the Institutskaya, which is up the really 500 meters from Maidan. And he said he met with his Minister of Interior and the responsible of the security. And all these people said to him, "What have you signed?" And he said, "Well, the European Union came, they give me a paper, I signed it, but there was nothing about that." And these people told him, "Well, but you signed that we will be judged." And said, "But just a paper, it's not serious." And they said, "Are you serious? You signed this paper?" And he said, "Yes, but just to relax with the European Union and to find a kind of political solution. There will be nothing implemented." These people get out of his office, and few hours after, there was no more security around his building. At this very moment, he quit the country. So I cannot tell you that this is going to be the end of Putin, but presumably, if the security forces feel they are threatened in the situation, they will stop protecting, but this is certainly not the situation at the moment in Russia.
Right. Yeah, a lot to unpack there. Thank you very much. We have already a question for you, actually, Boris, but we will take it in the Q&A session in a moment. Just for those who have questions, please write them again in the Q&A, and also if you could specify whom you're asking out of our panelists. Okay, let's move to the other big and long, both short-term and long-term challenge posed by the invasion, and that is the flow of refugees. And so I would like to ask Petra, to ask you to tell us a little bit about well, what is happening, what mechanisms have been activated with regards to essentially welcoming, if I may use that word, Ukrainian refugees, and what can we expect in the future?
Thank you very much, Igor, and thank you very much for the audience for being with us today. Let me reassure you that there are good reasons to talk about the, let's say, migration or displaced persons aspect of the Ukrainian invasion by Russia. First of all, because very similarly to the CFSP, unthinkable and unprecedented things have happened. And secondly, that these events may have an impact on the European Union's own migration policy. And this is why this is very important to consider and seize the moment for reflection. So what are the remarkable things that have taken place? First of all, the EU immediately reacted and activated a mechanism which was available for the EU for the last 20 years. And in the last 20 years, this mechanism called temporary protection has never ever been put into place. Not in 2011, when we had the Arab Spring, not in 2015 and 16, when we had the migration crisis. This mechanism was not put in place. With regard to the Ukrainian situation, well, the war in Ukraine, the temporary protection mechanism was put in place in 3 days. So it was February 27th of February when basically the Justice and Home Affairs ministers decided to reactivate this mechanism. So what is this? Basically, the temporary protection mechanism is exactly for situations that we have been observing, when immediately from a third country, a flow of displaced persons get in, who need immediate protection because they are unable to stay because of endemic violence, because of armed conflict at their habitual residence. So this was put in place. Why this is an advantageous form of protection for the time being? Because it's immediate. It is not an individualized process as opposed to the asylum procedure when meticulous procedures, administrative procedures are put in place to investigate, to see whether a person has been persecuted in his or her country of origin or has a genuine fear for being persecuted and for that reason is unable and unwilling to go back. Temporary protection is immediate. You say you are Ukrainian and you receive the protection for a temporary period of time, which is 1 year that can be extended with 2 other half years. So that's unprecedented. The question here for the long term, and this is what I think benefits of being reflected on, is that why suddenly this mechanism became possible to deploy and why this instrument was not possible to deploy previously. What explains the sudden swiftness of adopting these measures? And the answers to this is important because this may help us to understand what works for Europe and what's not. So let's admit that Ukrainians are Europeans, and as opposed to Syrians, Iraqis, Afghanis, Libyans, with regard to whom these measures have the temporary protection mechanism was not put into place, and therefore many lives were lost by crossing the Mediterranean, by dragging themselves through the Balkan route in 2016 and 2015. So this is one very valid point in seeing why suddenly this measure was possible. The other reason that comes to mind is that immediate measures were needed, and this was the easiest to do, requiring zero administration from the side of the member states. On the other hand, well, again, geopolitics, there is no country between Ukraine and the Schengen area. So there is no wonderful third country to whom the taking care of displaced persons could be externalized. So that very well explains that Europe itself had to solve this problem. There was no Turkey, and there was no country other in between which could have absorbed this flow of migrants. Thirdly, Ukrainians travel in Europe visa-free, so they can immediately cross the border. Visa liberalization with regard to Ukraine started in 2007 and 2011, and basically was finalized by 2017. The Ukrainian government went into pains in order to meet all the requirements the EU was imposing vis-a-vis the visa-free travel. So what does that mean? That Ukrainians would have been able to cross the borders anyway, as opposed to asylum seekers coming from the Middle East, for example, or North Africa, who are all visa required and immediately held up on the border. So that's a great difference. In perspective, what does it tell us? And why the imposition and deployment of the temporary protection regime promises us? Well, that's the following. Management of migration, asylum policy has been in a, let's say, euphemistically, in a stalemate for the last couple of years. So ever since the 2015-2016 migration crisis, Europe was not finding the way out to basically share this burden of providing international protection, how member states could leverage this task among themselves. And perhaps this crisis will give a new impetus, showing that it is really for everyone. It is not only the haunted task of the Mediterranean countries to take care of the asylum seekers. It's now the Visegrad countries, the biggest opponents of the reform of the common European asylum system, who have to deal with the situation and feel very probably what does it mean on their asylum systems, on their reception capacities to deal with mass influx. So the situation we have for the time being is the following: Ukrainians coming to the Schengen area are not refugees proper. They are third country nationals benefiting from temporary protection. This doesn't mean that they can never be recognized as refugees. If they apply for asylum on the basis of the individualized process, they may be recognized. In Europe, this will not probably be the convention status of becoming a refugee, but probably they will be receiving subsidiary protection, but which, when it comes to rights, equals with the refugee status. That's one aspect. The second aspect is, which is not very much reflected upon, but will be very important, that a lot of stateless persons come through the border as well. Why? Because of the situation in Donetsk and Donbass. There is no proper civil administration, and the generation grew up without proper documentation. So therefore, when it comes to dealing with the mass influx coming from Ukraine, there is one particular aspect which makes protection very difficult. That is the absence of IDs and passports, and persons not having proper citizenship. So this is an aspect that is sometimes forgotten. According to the World Bank, last year in Ukraine, there was almost 1 million stateless persons, and statelessness in that sense equals not having documents. So this is something which will need particular attention. So in the long run, what I would add is the following: the current way of having to deal with the Ukrainian influx of displaced persons have the capacity to give an impulse to the very difficult discussions when it comes to the new pact on migration for many reasons. First, that Europe does need a crisis management tool, whatever you call it. Solidarity must be exercised by all the member states. And thirdly, let's not forget that this current regime that was put into place, the temporary protection regime, breaks away from the fundamental and most important philosophical underpinning of the current protection system, and that is the Dublin system, which means that the applicant goes wherever the EU tells it to go, and this is where protection takes place. The current temporary protection allows Ukrainians to kind of choose where they want to go, and people end up at places they can plan in the long term to live, and basically reduces again administrative burden from the member states of having to deal with relocating people and basically taking back applicants and giving over applicants. So, and it seems so far, and this is what has to be seen in the longer term, whether this can work, because then it will be a kind of evidence that we can break away from Dublin and this basically need or sense of having to control where people go. So this would be my immediate reaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petra. Very clear and concise. We see some quite remarkable things happening there as well. because of the sheer volume of refugees that are now in Poland and in the Czech Republic. We are a bit short on time, so I would like to move on to questions and answers. There's been some exchanges with Wolfgang in the chat and some link dropped, so check it out. But I'm turning now to the questions and answers. So there's a question I'm taking them chronologically. From Michal to Boris, what is your take on Kremlin's recent move to require payment in rubles for its gas and oil supplies to Europe? Could this delay the Russian currency from plummeting further in a short-term perspective? And furthermore, how easy, actually it's 3 questions to be fair, not 1. So furthermore, how easy, hard is it to implement this kind of change in current contracts on supplies from Russia? So Boris, the floor is yours.
Okay, the war is illegal at the moment, of course, but this is also illegal. So contractually, you cannot impose, I think, to pay the gas in ruble. So that's not possible. And in addition, I don't think Germans or French or whatever have access to so much quantity of Russian currency to pay for. So not feasible. Not actually interesting for Russia itself, because Russia needs desperately hard currency. So I don't think it's a good solution. So I think let's understand why this was requested by Putin. I think Putin wants the situation to get more chaotic because he thinks is more able to handle chaotic situation than we are. So in other words, this is going to create a lot of chaos, actually even pushing, if it's really implemented, which I think it's impossible, is going to create the impossibility for European Union to pay the gas bill and the oil bill. So there is no way behind that to implement a long-term international trade relation with Russia. So it's a huge mistake. I think it's only propaganda for it's not even going to be implemented.
Thank you very much. There's a second question, which is apparently addressed to me about yes, Roberto is asking about the EUAM. I'm guessing this is the advisory mission to Ukraine, which is helping with the civil security sector. Well, maybe I could actually redirect the question to either Boris or Wolfgang, because they're more specialized specifically in this. The advisory mission is under the External Action Service. Yeah, exactly. So Wolfgang, please.
Yes, the advisory mission is one of the, I think now it's 16 or 17 missions of the Common Security and Defense Policy in Ukraine. Now as I understand, they are still in some field office. They are still active. It's a security. They are in charge of security sector reform, advising the police and the security forces. But however, it is clear that this, in the current environment, they cannot really function. They can function only in a stable and safe environment. So they might have a role once the conflict is over and once Ukraine reconsolidates, then especially if Ukraine is, or if the EU is getting serious on the accession perspective of Ukraine, then Ukraine has to make much more and much deeper reforms of its security sector, of its police force and others. And here in this context, such an advisory mission has an important role to play.
Thank you. Then we move to the next question. Yeah, so Christos Keramidas, what confuses me as a European citizen are the double standards that the Union is adopting in this conflict. The USA has been doing similar invasions for decades now with the same justifications as Russia. establish democracy, destroy weapons of mass destruction, and we impose no sanctions on them. Turkey has invaded Cyprus, and yet we have bilateral agreements with them and potentially EU membership. I think with regards to Turkish EU membership, Star Trek has more chances of becoming real. Like the Star Trek, you know, the Federation of Planets, I think is at this stage is more likely than actually having Turkey as a member. But fair enough. So in essence, yeah, the question of double standards. So what is now different with what Russia is doing and has mobilized the EU to such a degree? Is this approach of sanctions a U-turn in the CFSP, which could result in imposing similar sanctions to the other nations, like, for example, the USA? Well, Wolfgang, go ahead, please. I see you smiling.
I think we have to be realistic. The US is not a country on which you can impose sanctions. But I think we're going down a slippery slope here, because if we now start going into this whataboutism, or what is called whataboutism. Yes, what the Russians is bad, but the others, the US did also did bad things in the past. So can we really accuse the Russia for what is doing? This is very dangerous. I think I remember during the Soviet times, and I'm still old enough to remember this, and I also spent some time in the Soviet Union at this time. There was this Russian reaction, or the Soviet reaction, whenever someone criticized the Soviet Union for violating human rights, then their answer was, generally, in Russian it was, a u vas Negrov lynchуют. And in the US, you're lynching black people. So that was a way of discarding every criticism, to say you have no moral right to criticize us. And here, I think now we have to see things how we are. We saw the first, and maybe not the first, because we had Budapest in 1956, but the biggest violation of international law since World War II, the first time really since 1939 that one European country military aggressed and occupied parts of another sovereign country, the end of the European security order. We had some pre-tastes of this in 2014. We really didn't want to hear it and recount it as it was. We had also some an early warning in 2008 in Georgia, where we said, well, okay, but this is not really Europe, so let's discard it. Now, in fact, what we've seen already in 2008 was an end of the European security order, which was put in place in the 1970s, still in Helsinki. And a security order signed by the Soviet Union and its satellites, where the Soviet Union committed itself for respecting borders, for respecting the inviolability of sovereign states, to resolve issues in its differences in a peaceful manner. And that was shredded by Russia in 2014. And that's, yeah, since probably the question was coming, Kosovo in 1999. No, Kosovo was a very different story. And I'm happy to expand on this because I worked 4 years for the European Commission in Kosovo, and I followed this closely. This is a very different story.
No doubt there. I mean, I fully agree with you, Wolfgang. I mean, the situations are not comparable. The big difference with the United States is that the United States are actually an ally and a member of NATO. The situation in Kosovo was absolutely completely different one. So I fully agree with your statement. I don't know if Boris, you wanted to add something on this specifically.
Yeah, the risk of saying you don't do anything because something wrong was done before, whatever is wrong, because we hope of course, of getting things better and not nihilism. Nihilism is tough for international relation, for internal one. So you don't want people saying, okay, somebody was doing something bad in the past, so we shouldn't do anything today, because going this way will just, continuing destroying whatever countries. But I agree with Wolfgang that this is something that was never happened, invading a country, saying that this country is not existing, as Putin was saying, and saying that Ukraine should not exist as a country. I think nobody has done that since the Second World War. So any other attempt in this way is probably in Kuwait, if we can say some of the example we have in mind. So a country saying we invite this country because this country should not exist, was the war in Kuwait, for instance. But I don't think, and of course the situation in the world in former Yugoslavia. But again, in any of this situation, we can say that the real aim, and we know it from this kind of war, is to try for a leader to maintain his power and grab on power. It's not necessarily anything to do with Ukraine or whatever. It's just to reinforce internal power in a country. So usually we cannot accept using forces just to maintain his power.
Right, thank you, Petra. And do you want to add something?
Yeah, just supporting everything that has been said. Ever since the Second World War, in the UN Charter, there is the invisibility of territorial integrity and national sovereignty. So, and in this case, what we see is one European country basically wanting to grab territory and deny the existence of another country, which was not the same case in the potential other invasions that you can have in mind. But mind you, for example, in Libya, there was a Security Council resolution allowing entry. Yes, the Iraqi precedent is, well, hopefully not precedent. The Iraq's invasion is a painful story, but it was for toppling the regime and basically getting rid of the weapons of mass destructions, and not about basically taking over Iraq's territory and claiming that such state should not exist. So this is what I would just like to add.
Yeah, quite good examples there. Thank you very much. The next question I apologize, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but the Radmakers. So the question is the following: could the panelists please provide a perspective on lifting sanctions as a carrot or leverage to steer Russia into a ceasefire? Because at the moment the sanctions seem to bear a punitive aim instead of a strategic one. So Boris, do you want to start?
Yeah. First of all, it's not that there was no try to negotiate anything with the Kremlin and Putin. There were several tries, several meetings. I think Macron talked 8 times, something like that. And so clearly, one of the message of the Kremlin is that they're not going to stop until they succeed on their political or their military objectives. And actually, no sanction at the moment, as the message is sent by the Kremlin, is that they're not willing to stop. So the thing is more about, do we want to finance the war? That's a very important question for your opinion. So that's a core question for us to know if we want to send money and to reinforce the conflict as it is. So I would say that also all the wars and the conflict are not the same. This conflict looks more and more like the Syrian one, meaning that the main target is the civil population. So I think it's really problematic to see your opinion in a way buying oil and gas and financing a war that is targeting mainly civilians. So I think the good solution, if we want, I will tell it again, to stop the war, is that the country is not able to finance it anymore because it's very costly a war. And nobody could argue that is in favor of financing a war that is targeting families and households. And so I think this is the best policy that we can implement in terms of protection of civilians. If we're not involved directly, we should at least not finance the war.
Thank you, Boris. Yeah, I understand your point, and I fully agree that this is now the key question, especially in the light of the decision of the United States to cut the gas purchasing. So the EU is still not there, and it brings me actually back to the question of which Wolfgang actually answered in written. So it's under question and answer, and then you go into answered. Where one of the questions raised is how do we fail to reduce dependence on Russian energy and the whole question of Nord Stream 2, etc. I would like to just come back to that, because the thing is that the reduction of dependence on Russian sources of energy is and was an objective for a while now. And under the Green Deal, there's been an unprecedented set of measures to achieve this objective. But then you wake up on the morning of the 24th of February, and all of a sudden, what was the objective for 2030 must be done now. So that's the game changer, I'd say. So the setup of the progressive reduction of dependence was on its path. Mind you, last 2 years ago, so in last October, the EU published the State of the Energy Union report. And for the first time in 2019, the EU had used more of renewables than of fossil fuels. Okay, it was only by 1 point of percentage. So it was like 37 for the renewables, 36 for the fossil. But nevertheless, shows that we are on that path and on that trend. But what happens when you have such a dramatic and military situation is that everything changes. You must adapt quickly. We have done that with the sanctions. The US have done this by cutting the purchasing of gas. The EU hasn't yet, but maybe it's just a question of time, because precisely at some point we're going to realize that we don't want to finance the war. And Nord Stream 2 is suspended. As Wolfgang rightly pointed out, energy is actually not just a competence of the EU, it is a shared competence, which means that there are still decisions such as the Nord Stream that are taken at national level, which doesn't really help, because then you have to look at everything at the same time. There are EU initiatives for energy efficiency, energy renewables. There is an energy governance system that is put at the level of the EU. But there are still some competences which remain in the hands of member states. So you have to play with all that, with all those, tools and also constraints that you may have. Right.
If I might jump in on this, I agree with you, Igor, on this, and I can maybe say that in addition to being senior lecturer at IPA, I'm also a member of a German political party, which is part of the governing coalition there. And there are very hard discussions internally about this dependence on Russian gas. We agree, we have been naive in the past, because we saw this kind of mutual, this dependence on Russia. We saw it rather as a mutual dependence, and we saw this mutual interdependence rather as a source of harmony than a source of conflict. Because the idea was also, okay, if we are dependent on their gas, yes, they are also dependent on our money. So that means we are condemned, whatever comes to working together, we are locked into cooperation, and that will be beneficial for both sides. But now it turns up on the 24th of February, and probably even before we realized, no, it doesn't work like this, we were too naive. And now we have a situation in Germany where we still depend for 55% of from our gas on Russia. In other EU countries, it's even worse, where we realize, yes, we would really, really, really love to cut the pipelines to do without the Russian gas, but we're not able to, because in the short term, we have no means of substituting this. And there is absolutely no sense in now taking a very emotional and spontaneous decision and say, no, we're not going to buy any gas from Russia. If we have to come back then at the beginning of next winter with our tail between the legs to the Russians and say, well, finally, we realized we can't do this, and can we have your gas again? And that doesn't make sense. So what we have to do is now to really double our efforts, triple our efforts. Now we have dusted off plans to get 2 LNG terminals in Germany to get this done as soon as possible, but it will take us at least 3, 4, 5 years maybe to wean us off. And that means also, yes, we have to stick to coal, and we have to use more coal for a while. So there are trade-offs to be made.
Absolutely. I will just want to. I see there's a hand raised by the participants, but could you, because we can't enable participants to directly take the floor, but please do type your question in the Q&A. And there is well, first, Boris, you wanted to mention something else?
Yeah, just the reflection of Wolfgang is important. And it's an old reflection in economics. Do you have what we call in French le doux commerce, meaning do you have trade and economic interests that can be pacifying and reducing the risk of war? Unfortunately, in the history of Europe, that was not like that. So we had common economic interests in the beginning of the 20th century, and we still been going through tough wars. So what it means is that it's not that, I will say, the interest of doing trade will pacify political passions and make it, no, sometime in history it's the opposite. So when you have the capacity of doing war and the financing, the war could be even more dangerous. So we have to be careful about not simply, as it was the case also in Marxism, opposing political passion or war to trade. Sometimes you have both together. You can have trade and wars in history. So it's not necessary that because you have economic links that we have between France and Germany, you know, Wolfgang, for decades, that we didn't have 3 wars together. So if we learn from history, our own European history, I think we'll see that trade is not necessarily something that prevents conflict, unfortunately. As an economist, I'd be happy to say yes, but it's not the case.
Thank you very much. There is one additional question in the chat by Martina, and I'm raising it because, well, it's addressed to Petra, but it's a very, very interesting question. Wouldn't you agree that the strategies implemented now to welcome the Ukrainian refugees have set an important precedent for taking similar measures in possible future refugees crisis? And what are the possibilities that the EU would back away from that kind of approach?
Thank you very much. Absolutely, I would agree with this, that this is both an inspiration and hopefully a good practice. Because what's happening now is exactly getting rid of the Dublin system, getting rid of the idea that the first country of entry should basically launching the asylum application process, and from then on deal with the problem, which has zero solidarity consideration involved. And this was the philosophy of the Dublin Convention 30 years ago, but the geopolitics has completely changed, and migration routes have also changed. So yes, let's hope to the better. Let's hope that this elevates European societies, because it's not only the politicians, the societies who welcome and live together with the Ukrainian displaced persons, with those who are affected by the war in Ukraine. And let's hope that that will inspire and allow our chosen government to design a better and more just European asylum system.
Thank you very much. It is time to conclude. We have exceeded by 4 minutes our time. And I see that we have a colleague who is behind the scenes assisting us and writing that you can stay informed about our upcoming events and activities. Thank you all. Thank you, Michel, for your nice comment in the chat. Very much appreciated. I would also like to point out that unfortunately, I think the situation is going to last. Which means that we will be having the, I don't hate using that word, but the opportunity, not the opportunity, but we will be doing other talks like this quite frequently, I think. So do indeed, please check our website for that or our social media. I see that there is there's another comment by Pablo about economic repercussions on the EU after what Russian government has done, but things could turn worse. The Russian president has shown he's not a trustworthy leader, and things could turn worse. Yes, well, that's the point exactly. So it could be getting worse before it gets better. So we'll be having additional talks and additional events, generally speaking, on the issue of the current war in Ukraine. Of course, there are multiple crises currently in the EU, so we also try to address issues, other issues like the digital single market or the Green Deal, etc. So you can find all the information on our website. I have attended recently. I have attended recently an event moderated by Wolfgang, and I'm happy to copy his method, which is plainly saying I'm not going to summarize the debates. So that's I think a good way to conclude. So thank you all, and hope to see you sometime in the future, be it Zoom or in our premises. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.